Red Bull brought 7 new upgrades to Austria. 7. At their home race. With Max Verstappen already over 100 points behind Antonelli, and a car he had called undrivable. This was supposed to be the rescue package. The comeback. The moment Red Bull proved the RB22 was not broken, just unfinished. But then came the nightmare question. What if the upgrades made everything worse? Because the problem was never just one part. It was the whole car fighting itself. Too heavy. Too nervous. Too narrow in its setup window. Understeer when Verstappen needed rotation. Oversteer when he needed trust. A strong Ford power unit trapped inside a chassis that could not use it. And that is why 7 upgrades may have created 7 new problems. A new floor can add downforce, but if that downforce appears and disappears at the wrong moment, the driver loses confidence. A new sidepod can improve cooling, but it can also change the airflow feeding the rear. A lighter car can help lap time, but it cannot fix a platform Verstappen does not trust. And when Max says every lap feels like survival, more parts are not enough. Because Red Bull did not need a longer upgrade list. They needed a car that finally made sense. And Austria may have exposed the brutal truth. The RB22 is not missing one solution. It may be built around the wrong question. The first thing to understand is that Red Bull's Austrian upgrade did not arrive as a normal development step. It arrived as a rescue mission. That is a completely different kind of pressure. A normal upgrade says, "We found performance." This one said, "We are trying to stop the season from collapsing." Because by the time Red Bull reached Austria, the RB22 had already become one of the most confusing cars on the grid. Not because it was slow in a simple way. Slow can be understood. Slow can be measured. Slow can be attacked with development. The RB22 was worse than slow. It was unpredictable. And unpredictable cars destroy trust faster than anything else in Formula 1. Max Verstappen can handle a car that is not perfect. He has done that for years. He can drive around weaknesses. He can use the brakes, the throttle, and the steering in ways most drivers simply cannot. He can make a difficult car look sharper than it really is. But even Verstappen needs one thing. A reference. He needs to know what the car will do when he turns in. He needs to know when the rear will move. He needs to know how much speed the front axle will accept. He needs to know that if he changes something from lap to lap, the car will answer in a way he can understand. The RB22 has not been giving him that. That is why his words have sounded so brutal. Undrivable. Survival. Not in control. Beyond frustration. Those are not normal complaints from a driver who missed pole by a tenth. Those are the words of a driver who feels the car is refusing to speak clearly. And that is where Red Bull's problem really begins. Because a car that is slow but honest can still be developed. The team knows where the weakness is. The driver can point to it. The engineers can test a solution. The feedback loop works. But a car that is dishonest, a car that gives understeer in one phase and oversteer in the next, a car that changes personality through the corner, that is much harder to fix. And that is exactly the nightmare Red Bull carried into Austria. Verstappen had described a car that would not turn in the middle of the corner, yet still snapped with oversteer on entry. Think about how cruel that is for a driver. The front does not give enough when he needs rotation. Then the rear gives too much when he needs stability. So he cannot attack the entry with confidence, he cannot trust the middle of the corner, and he cannot recover the time cleanly on exit. That is not one weakness. That is a trap. And when a driver is trapped inside that kind of balance, every lap becomes negotiation. He brakes a little differently. The car responds differently. He turns in. The front hesitates. He waits. The rear moves. He catches it. The lap is already gone. Then he tries again, and the car changes the question. That is why Verstappen said every lap felt like survival. Because survival in a Formula 1 car does not mean the driver is scared in a normal human sense. It means the car is forcing him to react instead of attack. It means he is correcting instead of committing. It means the lap is being driven by problems, not by intention. That is the worst possible place for Red Bull to be. Especially at Austria. Because the Red Bull ring does not give a broken car many places to hide. It is short. It is sharp. It is exposed. A tiny hesitation out of one corner matters. A nervous rear through a braking zone matters. A car that cannot settle quickly loses time everywhere, because there are not enough corners to win the time back quietly. And this was Red Bull's home race. That matters emotionally. At a home race, every weakness feels louder. Every camera watches more closely. Every question becomes more pointed. The fans expect the team to respond. The sponsors expect energy. The garage wants a sign that the fight is not over. So when Red Bull brought 7 components, the message was obvious. They were trying to change the story. The revised sidepod inlet was meant to manage air pressure into the radiators more effectively, especially with the demands of the Red Bull Ring. The new engine cover followed that change, shaped around cooling and reliability needs. The revised floor and floorboard were the biggest technical signal, because the floor is where modern Formula One cars create much of their hidden grip. The rear suspension fairings around the gearbox were reprofiled to stabilize airflow. The rear wing pylon profiles were reworked to keep that flow cleaner. The exhaust tailpipe area was adjusted to help local aerodynamic load. And Red Bull continued trying to take weight out of the car, because the RB22 had started the season too heavy and was still paying for it. On paper, that sounds like a serious answer. But here is the problem. A parts list is not the same as a solution. That is the trap fans often fall into. 7 upgrade sounds powerful because 7 sounds like action. It sounds like the team has attacked the problem from every side. It sounds like the car should suddenly become faster, calmer, and more competitive. But in Formula One, every new part changes the conversation the air is having with the car. And if the car already has a confused aerodynamic platform, more parts can make the conversation even harder to understand. The sidepod inlet does not only affect cooling. It changes the way air moves around the bodywork. The engine cover does not only protect reliability. It affects the flow heading toward the rear of the car. The floor does not simply add grip. It changes where and when the car creates load. The suspension fairings do not only sit there. They shape the air passing toward sensitive rear areas. The rear wing pylon profiles can affect flow stability. The exhaust detail can influence local aerodynamic behavior. Weight saving can alter compromises around stiffness, packaging, and ballast placement. None of these parts live alone. They all talk to each other. And if one of them speaks the wrong language, the car can become even harder to read. That is why the Austrian package was so risky. Red Bull was not upgrading a calm car. It was upgrading a nervous car. And a nervous car does not always reward aggression from the factory. Sometimes it punishes it. Because when the platform is already too narrow, every change can push the car out of the tiny window where it works. A narrow setup window means the car only behaves properly under very specific conditions. The ride height has to be right. The tires have to be in the right temperature range. The aero balance has to be stable. The suspension has to control the platform without upsetting the airflow. Now put that narrow car at Austria. Elevation changes. Hard braking. Short lap. Curbs. Traction zones. A circuit that asks the car to settle quickly and repeat the same behavior every lap. If the RB22 was already struggling to stay predictable, Austria was always going to expose whether Red Bull's new parts had actually widened the window, or just moved the problem somewhere else. And that is the key question. Did the upgrades fix the car? Or did they simply change the way the car was broken? That is what makes this block so important. Because a failed upgrade does not always mean the new parts produce less downforce. Sometimes the numbers improve in one area, but the driver still cannot use them. More downforce is useless if it arrives too late. More rear load is dangerous if it disappears suddenly. More efficiency does not help if the car becomes harder to balance. Less weight does not save you if the platform is still unpredictable. Verstappen does not drive a spreadsheet. He drives the feeling at the limit. And if that feeling does not improve, the upgrade has failed in the only place that matters. That is why the RB22's overweight problem is so important, but not enough by itself. Weight costs lap time. It hurts tires. It reduces setup freedom. It limits where the team can place ballast to fine-tune balance. Reports describe the car as starting the season significantly above the minimum weight, with estimates ranging from around 6 to 7 kilograms over, to as much as 10 kilograms over. That is a huge burden in Formula One. It is like asking a sprinter to race with a backpack and then wondering why every acceleration looks expensive. Red Bull worked to reduce that weight, including with the Miami updates, and Austria continued that program. But weight loss cannot magically fix a car that refuses to behave. A lighter unstable car is still unstable. It just becomes unstable with slightly less mass. And sometimes, if the weight reduction comes with packaging or stiffness compromises, the feel can even become harder to manage. That is why Red Bull's crisis was never just about the scale reading. The weight hurt. But the deeper pain was the relationship between the aero platform and the mechanical behavior of the car. In simple terms, the car needed the air and the suspension to agree with each other. They were not agreeing. The aerodynamic platform needed stable ride heights and clean flow to produce dependable grip. The suspension needed to control the car's movement without making the driver feel punished. The tires needed a car that did not slide unpredictably. And Verstappen needed all of that to happen in a way he could trust. Instead, the RB22 kept giving him contradictions. That is what makes the Ford power unit story so strange. Before the season, many people expected Red Bull's engine program to be the biggest question. Red Bull powertrains and Ford entering this new era was a massive gamble. Under the 2026 rules, with a much greater electrical contribution, battery knowledge and electric motor expertise became critical. Ford's contribution was supposed to help Red Bull in exactly those areas. And according to the source material, the power unit has not been the main weakness. In fact, the Red Bull powertrain's Ford unit appears competitive enough that Red Bull may not qualify for extra engine development help under the catch-up system. That should be good news. But for Red Bull, it almost makes the season more painful. Because if the engine were bad, the explanation would be clean. New power unit project. New partner. New rules. Painful first year. But that is not the clean story. The more uncomfortable story is that Red Bull may have built a strong heart and placed it inside a body that cannot use it. That is devastating. A powerful power unit can only help if the chassis lets the driver deploy it with confidence. If the car is sliding, the tires suffer. If the rear is nervous, the driver cannot get to throttle early enough. If the aero balance is unpredictable, straight-line strength becomes less useful because the driver has already lost time entering and exiting the corner. That is how a strong power unit gets wasted. And that is why the Austrian upgrade had to do more than add performance. It had to unlock the performance Red Bull already had. That is much harder. Because unlocking performance requires understanding. Not just new parts. Understanding. And the most alarming thing from Verstappen's early season comments was that Red Bull did not seem to have a clear handle on the RB22. He said they changed a lot on the car and it made zero difference. That is one of the most worrying things a driver can say. Because when changes make no difference, the team loses the map. The engineers are trying to guide the car toward a better place, but the car is not responding in a reliable way. And without a reliable response, development becomes guesswork. That is why Austria was not just a performance test. It was a truth test. Red Bull needed to know whether its biggest upgrade package actually pointed in the right direction. Not whether it looked impressive in the technical documents. Not whether it produced a good image for the home race. Not whether the list sounded aggressive. Whether it gave Verstappen a clearer car. Because for Max, clearer matters more than dramatic. A slightly slower car he can trust might be more useful than a theoretically faster car that keeps surprising him. That sounds strange, but it is true. A predictable car lets a driver build. He can brake later step by step. He can test lines. He can understand tire limits. He can push the lap toward the edge because the edge stays in the same place. An unpredictable car moves the edge. And when the edge moves, the driver has to leave margin. Margin kills lap time. That is why the RB22's worst weakness may not be lack of performance. It may be lack of trust. And trust is not rebuilt by declaring an upgrade package. It is rebuilt in the first corners where the driver feels something different. A stable entry. A front end that bites. A rear that does not snap. A car that takes a curb without bouncing into chaos. A setup change that gives the expected response. Those are the moments Red Bull needed in Austria. But if the 7-part upgrade failed to deliver them, then the package did not simply underperform. It deepened the crisis. Because it told Verstappen that even the biggest push of the season was not enough to give him the car he needed. That is how an upgrade can make a car feel worse, even before the lap time says everything. It can raise expectation, then fail to change the sensation. It can give the team more data, but not more direction. It can create new interactions that take sessions to decode. It can shift the balance from one bad behavior to another. It can make the driver feel like the team is adding complexity instead of clarity. And when a driver is already beyond frustration, that matters. Because beyond frustration is dangerous territory. Frustration means anger with hope still inside it. Beyond frustration means the driver is beginning to run out of belief that the next change will be the one. That is not where Red Bull wants Verstappen. Not at a home race. Not while he sits far behind Antonelli in the championship. Not while Mercedes, Ferrari, and McLaren all look more complete. The points table made the pressure even worse. Verstappen was 7th in the drivers' standings after Canada, over 100 points behind Antonelli according to the source. Red Bull was only 4th in the constructors' fight.